Hello and welcome. I am Helen Dulac, Public Education Manager for the North Texas Municipal Water District. The North Texas Municipal Water District is a water, wastewater, and solid waste provider. Here in North Texas, we provide water to nearly 2 million people in 10 counties across North Texas. Conserving water is very important in North Texas, especially during our hot, dry summers, when water use increases by 50%, mainly due to outdoor watering. This is why NTMWD teams up with local experts on this series of virtual classes to help you have a healthy landscape while using our most precious resource, water, wisely. As a thank you, we're having a garden toolkit giveaway. If you are in the live Zoom session and want to be entered into the drawing, please send me a direct message with your name and email address. One of the people who sends me their name and email will be randomly selected to win the garden toolkit. Please note that this session is being recorded and it will be posted on the North Texas Municipal Water District YouTube page. If this session goes long or you need to leave early, please look there for the replay. Out of respect for our presenter, please keep your mic muted and your video off to conserve bandwidth. Our speaker is looking forward to answering your questions, so please type those in the chat. I will monitor the chat for our speaker and ask those questions at the end of the presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce Janet D. Smith. Janet is a recovering plantaholic who considers the master gardener, master naturalist, and native plant training as her 12-step program. She specializes in creating attractive landscapes that conserve natural resources and money, are good for the local ecology, and attract bees, butterflies, and birds. She loves helping others discover the thrill of having their own nature channel out their windows. All right, Janet, please start.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Or maybe I should say good afternoon. But welcome. I hope that you will learn something today. There's probably a little bit for everyone. If you're a newcomer, you probably will learn a lot. Some of you I know personally know a lot of this, but it's always good to hear it again. I hope you will agree. So why does this always happen that once, we tested this and everything went along fine?
Oh, I think it just went to sleep. You probably just need to wake it up.
Okay. I'm a Dallas County Master Gardener, and we're a branch of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and our mission is to educate the public about good horticultural practices. And this whole talk today will be doing that. So this is kind of landscaping for the 21st century. And our goals foremost is to have an attractive and functional landscape. And what's attractive and functional to you might be completely different than what is for your neighbor. You know, some of you have children, dogs, you need places for them to play. Some of you are like me, retired, no dogs, just a cat that doesn't go outside. So I can put plants wherever I want and I have no lawn. We're all interested in budgeting, especially in these inflationary times. So we want to do it within a budget. And there's many ways that we can do that. So, and some of them are by minimizing our water use and the use of chemicals. But we also want to provide habitat for our pollinators, birds, and other small critters. They are essential to life on this planet as we know them. And without them, we would not be able to survive. The human race would not be here if we didn't have the animals to help us take care of our planet. Perhaps some of you at least are in a homeowners association, and that can be a little complication. I'm lucky that I live in Dallas, down by White Rock Lake, in a mid-century neighborhood that has no restrictions except what is put in by the city. So I can do whatever I want in my yard. But if you're in a homeowner association, You must know what their rules are. And those rules must not prevent you from planting water-saving plants and doing other things to save water, like rain barrels. A good way to make sure you get to do what you want to do is to join their review board. But most homeowner associations, if they have a review board for landscaping and rules, you will have to submit your plans in advance to avoid this situation here in this cartoon. And ways that you can make your garden more likely to be improved are always to know the names of all your plants, to put some kind of edging around your bed so it looks intentional and not like some weed grew up in the middle of your yard. And if your beds are wide, put pathways through them. And that's really good for your soil as well, because you want to avoid walking on your soil where you're planting. You want that to stay as fluffy as possible. And it'll get compacted over time, but you don't want to be the one compacting it. So I'm a big proponent of pathways and stepping stones. And remember, the dullest landscapes require the most maintenance. If you drive by a house, which we all do, all they have is grass. That grass has to be immaculate. If they have one little patch of brown patch or something, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And if you have a diverse yard, then there's more things to draw the eye, and they won't notice the imperfect areas or the areas that are out of season or under development. Their eye will be drawn to something else. And diversity is something, it's probably the word of the 2020s in so many ways, but we want diversity in our landscape as well. I know if I'm out walking in a neighborhood, and I'll drive to different neighborhoods, and just when I see some interesting landscapes, I'll get out and do my walk there. But if I look down a block and all I see are big shade trees and grass and knee or chest high hedges against the house, I'm not going to walk down that way, because that's not interesting. I want to see things at a variety of levels, and that's the best way to plan your gardens and your landscapes. If your property is small, you might not have the space to have a canopy tree. But if you do, oaks are the best ones to plant. We usually all have room for a mid-story or understory shrubs and trees, and that's a great level for the birds. They love that mid-story, and we like it too because we can see them instead of having where all we see is a trunk out our windows and the canopy is up above our roof. We need the understory where we have our shrubs and some of our ornamental plants. We need ground covers. It might be grass. I hope you could be more creative. But we can have a lot of sedges, grasses, flowering plants, a lot of things at the ground cover level besides grass. And you also want to have some vines. Most yards have fences. To me, they just cry out for vines, unless you've got kids that are bouncing balls off them all the time or something like that. Then no, you don't want to have a vine there. But vines are wonderful places for birds to hang out, and they're beautiful. So think all levels, not just ground level. And in design, there's a rule of thirds. 1/3 hardscape, that would be your house, your driveway, your patio, your pool, things pretty much that are set in concrete and you're not going to be moving, most likely. You might want to move them. Lately, half my friends are putting in pools, the other half are filling in pools. So, nothing's, everything can change. And you'd like to have a third in beds that would include your shrubs, small trees, blooming plants, ground covers, vines, and limit your lawn to 1/3 or maybe even less, depending on what's appropriate for your family. You've always got to keep that in mind. So here we have a typical conventional landscape, and this is kind of what builders provide usually. You have a small tree, which may be a native, probably isn't. You have a non-native lawn that's going to take a lot of maintenance and a lot of water. You've got small foundation shrubs below your windows that maybe are planted in a hedge. And these days, when we're kind of into a free form of every kind of lifestyle, you know, I just kind of cringe when I see a new property with hedges, because nowadays we want to give plants the opportunity to grow to their natural form. And maybe we don't want a hedge look. We can put in yuccas and grasses and things that offer a softer look than a regimental hedge. And this yard is all very high maintenance. And you look at this, and it could be anywhere and everywhere. This could be in Frisco, Texas. It could be in Minot, North Dakota, or South Dakota, wherever that is, because it's kind of the pattern for an American landscape. And frankly, we live in Texas, and I bet you might have noticed Texans think a little differently. And more importantly, our soil and growing conditions and our lack of water require that we think differently when it comes to our landscape. So you want to create a sense of place. So use native plants. You can go all in like this yard, which I personally think is beautiful, but might not be your cup of tea or your homeowners association. You can do something more traditional, but still use natives. And note here, instead of a concrete walkway over here, well, whoops, sorry. On the right, it looks like they've got decomposed granite. You don't want to add more concrete to your yard unless it's absolutely necessary, because concrete creates runoff. And you know, we have these flash floods all the time when we get these torrential rains, which I wouldn't say we get all the time, but you know, we get them. We don't get a 1/4 inch of rain. We get 4 inches of rain in an hour. So we want to prevent runoff. So make your surfaces so they can absorb the water and keep that water on your property instead of sending it down into the street, into the gutters, into the streams that will flood. I live near White Rock Lake. After a big rain, we get what we call ring around the lake, which means we've got the trash all the way from Frisco has come down and been deposited on the overflow of our lake. Not a pretty sight. We want to avoid that as much as we can and keep that water on our property. And one thing I realized about 10 years ago is the importance, if you're one of those people that likes to have your windows open and not constantly covered with blinds or shutters or something, you can add to your inside beauty by having a beautiful landscape outside. And it just enhances the whole view from that room. And I remember hearing years ago that Barbara Streisand planted roses to match her furniture, so that when she looked out her window, it would all be in the same color palette. And I thought, oh my God, how obsessive is she? You know, we're all obsessive in some ways, but then I went to a friend's house that I had seen from the outside. She was on a garden tour and she had a party afterwards and invited me. And seeing the rooms of her landscape through the windows or the French door of her house just, it was beautiful. It was a, probably a 1,200 square foot mid-century house. But by incorporating the garden in the view from the room, it seemed like it was a huge house. So put things, most houses have the shrubs that started out below the windows. Some people let them come up and cover the windows. That's not a very nice view to me. And my kitchen window, where I live at my kitchen table, I look out on my backyard where I have planted it all for the pleasure of my viewing. So I have lots of blooming plants out there. I have my bird feeders. So I'm seeing birds and squirrels and butterflies and bees all the time, and it's lovely. So consider the view from inside when you're designing your landscape. And you can add hardscape. I love it. It takes up space and it doesn't need much maintenance. And I remember one master gardener doing a talk on curb appeal. He said, just think of a boulder as a shrub you never have to prune. And I thought that was great. And full disclosure, this is my front yard. It used to be a lousy lawn, and it faced west, and it was in that unrelenting sun, and it just, it was there. That's all I can say about it. And then I paid to get it mowed, and I paid ChemLawn to come and do whatever they did back before I knew better. This is my front yard now. I've got a dry riverbed there on the right. It's a great way to take up space and reduce the maintenance. It also helps with my runoff because sometimes it's not a dry riverbed. I live at the bottom of a hill. My front yard was built up with dirt that had to be removed from the back when I needed retaining walls to prevent flooding, and it turned into a rock garden. So I think this is much more attractive than a bad lawn. It takes much, much less water. One thing I learned last year, this is now 17 years old, and it's filled in completely, as you can see. And last summer when we had that big drought and I needed to water, which I usually never did during the summer, the plants were too dense for me to get in there with any kind of watering device. So this winter, my goal is to add more stepping stones and stop that dense growth so that I have a way to reach every plant if I need to water or if something dies. So I highly suggest things like that. But think about hardscape. It is an investment, but it's a one-time investment. If you've got an area that's in complete shade, give up on growing grass. One of my neighbors, 6 years in a row, resodded his yard. I'm sorry, I'm not willing to try something that failed 5 times. I'm not going to try the exact same thing again. I'm kind of out after twice, Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. You don't have to have plants growing everywhere. Here, this is a mature yard with mature trees, so part of it was always in shade, and the people just mulched it, put in a relaxation area that is in the shade. So that was a wonderful thing to do with that
It's
part of the
me.
yard.
I'm listening to my
You might get a concept design or think about what you want in your yard and create one, or hire a landscape designer to do it. There are people that design yards. You can often hire their company to do the installation, but you can just buy the design. So here you see this developing. Sorry. With all the different features that they wanted around their house. And so this gives them something, gives the homeowner something to work with. You're probably not going to implement all this at once, but you've got a plan for what you want to achieve over time as your budget allows. And then the finished product might look like this, where they've got all the plants identified, how many you're going to have of each. And once you've got your plan, you can implement it at your own rate. So that's kind of what you want to strive for. So the first thing you need to do is you need to analyze your soil, and you probably need to improve it, because frankly, when our houses were built, they scraped off all the native soil, and what they replaced it with is not a growing medium, it's dirt. And it usually needs to be enhanced in order to become a good growing medium. And the most important aspect of landscaping is to create good soil. So you want to get your soil tested, and you can do that by going to soiltesting.tamu, that's Texas A&M University.edu. And they'll have all the instructions, the cost. You can get it done at different levels. It tells you how to do it. You mail it in and you get the results, and it tells you exactly what your soil has and what it is lacking. So you know what to add to it. Because even if you're in, you didn't buy new property, somebody else lived there before, you have no idea what chemicals they put on it. And you need to know that. So soil testing is a very beneficial step to take. And my advice is do that this weekend, because the testing lab is pretty slow during the winter. If you wait until March or April, it might take a couple months before you get your results, because they're inundated with soil tests. But in mid-January, things are kind of slow and you'll get an immediate answer. So test your soil. And when you add these amendments that they will probably suggest, very few people have perfect soil to begin with. Then if your soil is not loose, and full of earthworms, we want earthworms. We want to see those robins in our yard getting that worm. Then you till in 3 inches of finished compost into the top 8 inches of soil. And this loosens up the soil, because plants need 3 things: air, nutrition, and water. And the thing that's missing from many yards is the air in the soil. Without some air, they can't absorb the nutrients, and the water can't get in. So it's very important. You want to create fluffy soil. And compost is finished. It's called finished compost when you can't tell what it used to be. And you can buy this by the bag in Plano. Plano creates their own, I think. And you can buy that. It's an excellent mulch. It's something you can buy at most big box stores and nurseries. If you need a lot, you might consider getting it delivered by the truckload, but figure out how much you need and determine if that amount is cheaper to have it delivered, because there is a big delivery fee, probably higher now than it ever was. And you want to put the right plant in the right place. I know my family moved here when I was 14, and we had lived primarily in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, in the suburbs of the major eastern cities. And we weren't finding the plants we were used to. And one we really missed was lilacs. And we would drive around trying to find lilacs. And we never found any. We found a lot of wisteria. And we'd actually get out of the car and go up and sniff it and say, nope, not a lilac. And we were missing lilies of the valley and other things. Well, there's a perfectly good reason for that. We don't have the right climate or the right soil for that. Many plants need a chill factor that they only get in the north. They're not going to grow here in the south. So you need to give up your dream of recreating the garden you had in Ohio or Indiana, because those plants aren't going to work in Texas. You've got to have the ones that work here. And one of the things, this is the cold hardiness map. And I circled the area we are, which is 7B and 8A. But this map does not consider the high temperatures we have and the temperature swings. You know, it's January, we've been up to 80 degrees. We're going to be down where we're in the 30s last night. We go from one end to the other. A couple of years ago, we were down in the single digits. When we get rain, we frequently get a lot of rain, and it all comes in April and October. We go all summer without rain. Sometimes we go all winter without rain. So those are considerations. Doesn't consider our soil. We have acids, we have alkaline soil. The eastern half of the US, and around here that starts like in Canton, which is what, 70 miles east of Dallas, all the way over to the Atlantic. They have acid soil. They can grow different plants than we can grow here in the alkaline. And wind, you know, it gets awfully windy here. A lot of plants might be too delicate and all their flowers would be, or their leaves would be blown off by our high winds. So all these are things to consider. And we've got microclimates and urban islands. I live on a residential feeder street that used to be 4 lanes, but they remarked it to 2 lanes. Thank goodness, because it was a raceway. But, you know, my front yard faces west, and it's going to get that sun reflecting off the concrete coming back into my garden. So I've got to consider that, because that adds a factor to what plants are going to survive. So there's a lot to consider, and that's why you need to use local references. You also need to know the sunlight. That's one of the most important things when choosing plants. So I suggest, now that we've all got our cameras with us night and day on our phone, and we can see what time we took the pictures, I suggest everybody go out on a sunny day at different seasons of the year, and every hour take another picture from the same spot. So you can see by looking through those pictures over the course of the day, how many hours of sunlight that spot gets, or shade, or the combination. You know, maybe it's in the sun until noon and then it's in the shade, or maybe it's in the shade until 1 o'clock and then gets the afternoon sun. All of those are very important things you need to know to choose the plants that will be happiest there, because we want happy plants. Unhappy plants are dead plants. And yes, typically 10% of plants that you put in the ground die anyway, but you want to be at 10%. You don't want to be at 90% because you're trying to put elephant ears in a sunny area when they need shade. So find out what the lighting is, do a little research. And native plants are wonderful. Native plants do not include anything that has a country name in them, like Chinese pistachio tree or Italian cedars, things like that, Japanese maples. You know, that first word is a clue. That's not native to Texas. And they might grow here, and you might be able to have them in your yard, but you don't want to use them as the majority of your plants. Maybe they could be accent plants. You want, most of your plants would be great to have native plants. And a number one reason for that is they need very little or no supplemental water once established. They need to be watered in for the first year. The bigger they are, the longer they need to be watered. So trees need to be watered in like for 3 years. Flowers, low growing plants, ground covers, 1 year. Shrubs and mid-story, 2 years. Then you can cut back on the water. And like my yard is fully mature now. And typically, if we don't get any rain for 2 months in the summer, I will water once. But I'm not watering every week, not even every month. So I use very little water, and my water bill has never exceeded $100 when it includes trash pickup and many other things. So I'm very lucky. I had a friend that lived in the same size yard I did. Her water bill was over $200 a month. I've never seen that. Native plants survive in our extreme climate. They've been here for thousands of years. The definition of a native plant that is widely accepted, and like any term, there's many definitions, but ones that were here before the Europeans arrived in the area. And in Texas, they arrived in the middle of the 1800s. The native plants provide food for our insects and critters, our birds, everything that helps our life be possible. And they create a sense of place, which we've kind of gone over. We want Texas to look like Texas. Texas is not going to look like Massachusetts. So if you've got an existing landscape and you want to add in natives, you could widen your foundation plantings. Or if you have a sprinkler system, you can repurpose the area of a sprinkler zone, because over time you're going to be reducing that water. So you don't want any high water usage plants in that new area. So using that as a way to divide your yard into different projects is a great way to do it, to use your sprinkler zones. You can convert your parkway, also called Hell Strip, because it is such a challenge to water your Hell Strip because it's so narrow. And in many cities now, they have real restrictions about what kind, that you have to put a sprinkler system in there of a certain type so that it will water just that strip and not the sidewalk or the street. You could add more native trees to your yard. Or when a plant dies, replace it with a native. So there's many ways to add natives into an existing landscape. There's much lower maintenance with natives because we've already talked about the irrigation. If you've repurposed what was lawn, you've eliminated the need to mow that area. You'll need little or no fertilization or pesticides. And the waste that you create, you can use in your garden as mulch. So lots of times when I'm trimming something back, if it's not real woody, I just break up the stems and sprinkle them on the ground. You can put your tree leaves in as mulch. It's ideal if you can break them down, maybe use a mulching mower. If you have trees over your lawn, use a mulching mower, capture those and put them in your beds, or just let them, the shredded ones, stay in there to improve your soil. If you want to use local plant lists and local sources, and this would be a good screen to do a screen print on. This Texas Smartscape is created by the North Central Council of Governments, and it has lookup tools where you can say you want a plant that's gonna flower in the summer with yellow flowers. You want it to be 4 feet tall and need sun. And it'll come up with a list, a choice of plants for you. NPSOT.org, that's the Native Plant Society of Texas. Go under their resource tab and there's regional plant lists and a lot of good information there. EKPSTAMU.edu is Earthkind Plant Selector. So these are plants that are ecologically sound for our area. Wildflower.org is the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center down in Austin. And if you want to know if a plant is a native, go to their plant search, type in the name, and if it doesn't pop up with any choices, then you know it's not native. I use that all the time for that purpose, and then to find out everything I want to know about that plant. Big box stores are not likely to be experts, nor are they likely to have native plants. Their plants aren't always the best for our area, and they feature a lot of annuals. Those are plants that only grow for 1 year, and they need water all that time. If you grow perennials, those are ones that come back for more than 2 years. So once you get them established, you don't have to water them. And you're not out there every season spending money down on your hands and knees planting flats of flowers. I had to give up annuals after I had a knee injury. And it's the best thing I ever did. I still have flowers that are blooming now because I chose the right ones. And a great source of plants is your nonprofit plant sales. And these, the Native Plant Society in each county has them. They have them at the Herd Museum is where the Collin County has theirs. Another great place is the Texas Discovery Garden, which is down at Fair Park in Dallas. They have fantastic plant sales. So look for those. You're likely to find plants that aren't available elsewhere in the big stores. And here are some of the independent full service nurseries that will have a lot of native plants and hopefully informed staff that can actually help you. And again, I list the nonprofit plant sales, which are just some of them in our area. Another screen you might want to do a screen print on. And you know, I mentioned budget. We're all conscious of money, or most of us have to be. So you need to be realistic in what you're going to do in your landscaping, and you'll want to implement in stages so that you can do, you know, one plot, one bed, say this year, another one next year. Maybe you need to wait 2 or 3 years to do another one. But if you hire it done, the cost will be 1/3 for the bed prep, 1/3 for the plants, and 1/3 for the labor. If you do it yourself, of course, you eliminate that 1/3 of labor, and it's just a half for bed prep and half for plants. But the point here is that bed prep is so important. It will be half of what you need to do for your landscape will be bed prep. And you always want to include the irrigation in your planning. And so if you're putting in a whole new yard and your house didn't come with an irrigation system, that might be getting the irrigation system designed about how you want to plant your yard. It could be that you're going to use hose end sprinklers. It could be that you're going to go out and hand water. So it's hard to determine how much money you should use for that because it fully depends on what kind of irrigation system you're going to get. And again, you want to implement in stages. Okay, let's talk about water. This cartoon is not something to laugh at. It's reality. You know how popular the North Texas area is. Perhaps you've recently moved here from some other part of the country. Well, the fact of the matter is, we're very short on water. And the more people we have, the more water we need, and we don't have enough to supply everybody to be able to water their lawns as much as they might think they need to. In reality, you can grow grass and water it every 2 to 3 weeks if you've let it establish correctly, if you have the right kind of grass. Or you can use other plants for most of your landscape that will use very little water. So of your household water, 1/3 approximately is used outside. So it is a big area where we can improve and reduce the amount of water we need. So effective and efficient watering. Only water when you need to. And if you have a sprinkler system and it's still on the same schedule it was on in the summer, I'm going to tell you to go out right now and turn it off, pull the plug, because in the winter, if we don't have rain, you only need to water once a month. Whenever you do water, you want to apply 1 inch. And that will eventually drain down, go through the soil, and cover the whole root zone. The best way to do that is to do the soak and cycle. You'll run it for some amount of time that you've determined, and then you let it sit for a half hour or more, and then run it again so that all the water can be absorbed by the soil instead of running down the sidewalk or the street. And the water departments, each municipality and each water district, like North Texas Water District that's sponsoring this talk, they all have information about this on their website. The best way to water is big drops close to the ground. If you're spraying up a mist, a lot of that water is going to be absorbed by the air before it ever gets to the ground. Misting really doesn't do anything for the plants. Even the fellow that designed the misting garden at the Arboretum, he happens to be a neighbor of mine and I know him, and he said, yeah, no, that misting is just for effect. It has nothing to do with watering the plants, but people love it. People are sitting in there all the time, and it creates, you know, a great escape place. You'll see people sitting in there reading and stuff, but it's not doing anything for the plants. You want to water the soil, not the leaves. And of course, you need to follow your city ordinances about when you can water. And in most of North Texas, that's twice a week, maybe on specified days based on your address, and not between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. during the summer, because then it's just too hot for the water to get to the ground and be absorbed. Use a rain gauge. I have a rain gauge all the time. And when I know we're going to get a good rain, I'll put a couple of drops of food color in it so I can tell at a glance how much rain we've gotten. And I always record the amount. If it's over 1 inch, I record it on my calendar because, frankly, you know, 3 days from now, I'll say, oh, did it rain on this Monday or was that last Monday? I want to know when it rained because that's going to impact when I'm going to need to water my plants. If I get 1 inch of rain, I know I'm good for a while. And then after the rain has stopped and you've recorded the amount, empty your rain gauge so it's available for the next rain event. And in the winter, if it's a glass tube, I would bring it inside because when the water freezes in it, it could break it. So one way you want to group your plants is by water zoning. So you have all the plants with the same water needs together, instead of putting a thirsty plant in the middle of a bunch of yuccas, like I saw them do at a local, at Mockingbird Station a few years ago. They took out all the existing landscape for some reason and replaced it. And they put a bunch of agave cactus in a bed with coleus plants, which have beautiful foliage, but they're annuals and they're very thirsty plants. And I remember saying to my friend, well, half of the plants in this garden are going to die because as they water for the needs of the other half, it's going to kill the ones that don't need that. And sure enough, 6 months later, they had replaced all the coleus with yuccas. So now the yuccas and agaves, it's a beautiful bed that doesn't need practically any water. It would fall in the natural rainfall. Excuse me. So your regular watering is every week. That would be your turf grass, your containers, your annual flowers. Occasional, every 2 to 3 weeks, your perennial flowers and tender woody shrubs and vines, and your natural rainfall. Then monthly, or in the absence of rain for a month. I mean, if it rains, you don't need to do this. And that's your tough woody shrubs and vines and trees after they're established. The best thing you can do is to have a moisture meter. It's something you can pick up at any garden supply place, big box stores. I used to say they cost under 10, now I'd say probably 15. You stick it in the ground and you get an immediate reading on the moisture level in the soil. And I call it the tool that tells me when I don't need to water. Because I used to have a lot of container plants and I would water them every day. When I started using the moisture meter, I found out I only needed to use them every 5th day. Right there on those plants, I was reducing the amount of water I used on them by 80%. So get a moisture meter. Afternoon wilting. You know, it gets hot in the afternoon in the summer here. You've probably noticed that. And how do we get by? How do we survive that? We usually come into the air conditioning. Well, the way plants survive the heat and bright sun is by curling up their leaves to protect them. So afternoon wilting is a natural occurrence. It doesn't necessarily mean the plant needs to be watered. If the plant still looks the same in the morning, then I use my moisture meter and see if I need to water it. But until I started using that moisture meter, I was watering every afternoon. Not a good thing. So native plants, one of their big advantages is that they have deep roots. And you can see the plant over here on the left is your typical turf grass. And, you know, its root system is inches. And frankly, the more often you water it, the shallower those roots are going to be, because it gets the water it needs right on top of the soil. It doesn't have to grow its roots deep to get water. And that's what native plants grow, deep roots, so they find water way down, you know, where we can't measure. So that's one of the reasons that they're so helpful. They're also great for controlling erosion because they're going to hold that soil in place. But you have to be patient. It takes a long time for those roots to grow, and the roots have to be established before the top of the plants, the leaves and the flowers can grow. So when you're planting and designing, space the plants for their mature size. I know I didn't believe this in the beginning, And I bought some lantanas that said plant on 7-foot centers. And I thought that can't possibly be right. So I put them a foot apart. Well, guess what? They grew 3 feet around the center of that plant. So 7 feet from one to another was the correct spacing on those. So, you know, where I bought 5 or 6 plants, I really only needed 1. So space it for their mature size. And remember, any plant, any perennial that's going to live multiple years, the first year they weep, they're going to adjust. The second year they creep, they're still developing those roots. The third year, the roots are pretty good, and then they're going to leap in size. So be prepared when you plant a bed. It shouldn't be totally covered with plants because then you're not giving them enough space. Be patient, mulch them well, and the garden will look fine. In a few years, it'll look fantastic. Mulch, I just mentioned it. It is like icing on the cake or the blanket on your bed. It does everything good for the soil and the plants. It conserves the soil moisture because now the soil was in the shade. It's buried under, ideally, 3 inches of mulch. It keeps the root systems cooler. Roots can't grow if the soil is over 85 degrees. And in the summer, it will be. So you put the mulch on that can lower the temperature of the soil by 15 degrees. It helps suppress weeds because they can't get the light they need. It protects the soil. And if you use hardwood mulch, it disintegrates and becomes next year's compost. Yes, you have to add more to it, but it's a way of fertilizing your soil. So a book or some videos you might want to watch are by Pan Pemick. She has The Water Saving Garden. This is a screen you might want to screen print. And she also has a lot of talks on YouTube. She is out of Austin, so she knows what the growing conditions are here in Texas. So you want to reduce the use of chemicals. So you test your soil and you use the results. Don't just send it off and get the paperback or the email. Actually carry out what they say. Prepare your beds, use the right plants. And remember that most insects are not harmful. So you don't need to be using a lot of chemicals in your yard. Over 95% of insect species are beneficial or benign. Benign means they do no harm. And insects are the best insecticide. So many of our insects eat other insects. They are a natural control. And that's why you want to use native plants, would attract native insects, so that you've already got built-in insecticide. And if you do need to use some insecticide, if you have a big infestation of something, use integrated pest management. You can Google that and find out what it means. But it's using insecticides only when you have a big infestation of damaging insects. It's using it according to the directions. If it said, put in a tablespoon in a gallon of water, put in a tablespoon. Don't put in 3 tablespoons thinking it's better. It's not. It's made to work with 1 tablespoon. So read the directions. And lastly, we want to provide habitat because over 95% of the land in the lower 48 has been modified. And we're living right in the middle of it. Some suburban areas have grown over 6,000% since 1960. And guess who's leading the pack? North Central Texas. I remember we moved here in 1960, and about in 65 is when LBJ, Highway 635, was opened from I-35 over to 75 Central Expressway. We went for a drive on it. and there was nothing there. And we thought, why did they build a road in the middle of nowhere? Well, guess what? Look how far we've spread. So there's not enough habitat for our native species to survive. So we've got to provide space for them. Support our pollinators. That's our bees, butterflies, moths, and birds. They're essential for plant reproduction, not just for the ones we plant, but for the food we eat. We need to keep the bee population as robust as we can, or we will starve to death. You need blooming plants. Leaves don't offer much for pollinators. You need blooming plants. So ones that never bloom are totally useless. They're as useful as concrete. And you want plants blooming in as many months of the year as possible. And the native and old variety plants are the best, not the hybrids. Hybrids have been bred to appeal to humans. If the plant name has a copyright sign or copyright or trademark on it, it is a hybrid and it's not a good one for the pollinators. So the best pollinators are plants are these. You might want to screen print it. All these have lots of natives and they offer a wide variety of types of flowers that attract a big variety of insects. Suggested reading is Nature's Best Hope by Douglas Tallamy. He also has wonderful videos on YouTube. So screen print this one too. I'm going to skip these theme gardens, but it'll be in the copied version. The little butterfly garden, it tells all about all the plants. So you can get a little idea of design. And remember, for 21st century, our goal in our landscape, be it a brand new blank slate or an established landscape, you want an attractive and functional one for you, within budget, minimizing water and chemicals, and providing habitat for pollinators, birds, and other small critters. So that completes my talk. My little ad at the end about master gardeners. Every county around here has their own master gardeners. They are a great source of information. So you just Google their websites and you can find out how to ask them questions. So that's my talk. I'll leave it up here in case there's people want to see a previous slide or something.
All right, Janet, thank you so much. That was so much good practical information. Your tips about like adding the food coloring to your rain gauge and emptying it out, of course, if it, in the winter so it doesn't crack. Those are fantastic tips. And just to remind everybody that to put your questions in the chat for Janet, and I will start with them. So Janet, one of our first questions is from Susan. And she has a concern that some of the worms she's seeing are actually Asian jumping worms and not earthworms. What suggestions do you have for her?
Wow, I'm not an insect expert, but I would say if she could verify that they are the Asian worms, call her county AgriLife extension agent or her master gardeners, and they can help her.
That's a good tip, especially reaching out to your extension agent. As a matter of fact, we will have Brad Voss, the Collin County extension agent, on our next talk on February 8th. He's going to be talking about our clay soils. So if you live in Collin County, try to register and log on for that so you can meet Brad. And they are a wealth of information. So absolutely, Janet. Okay, so how about a question from Alexander? This is actually a really good one. What organizations provide the Master Garden label or any other types of certifications for native plants?
Well, the master gardeners don't identify native plants. they suggest you use them. It's hard to know. If you're at one of those nurseries I mentioned, they probably have an indicator on the plant that says it's native. I would say get a plant list of native plants and use that as your guide. So like on the NTMWD website under resources, they have regional plant lists. That's like 150 native plants. So that pretty well covers it. I mean, there are some others, but you know, you're getting pretty obscure. So it's best to know what you're looking for rather than depend on a nursery to be able to tell you. You'll be better off at a full service independent nursery rather than a big box store. Probably they don't even know what the term means.
That's a good point. And you did cover like some of the organizations that have plant sales. I put a bunch of those into the chat, like the Texas Discovery Gardens has a plant sale twice a year. A lot of the different types of the different master gardeners have a plant sale. The Collin County Master Gardeners have a weekend-long garden show. It's going to be in early March at Myers Park, and there's lots of plants there for sale. And like Janet mentioned, some of these local nurseries that can help you with native plants. And then, you know, something else to remember is that because a plant is native in Texas, doesn't mean it's native to North Texas. So you could get a plant that does fantastic in McAllen, but it might struggle here in our colder temperatures. I realized that the hard way myself. And, you know, we just had another freeze, you know, a couple of weeks ago, not as bad as we had a couple of years ago. And I know a lot of people lost some of their cacti and some of those succulents and stuff from that hard freeze we had. All right, so Daniel has two questions. His first question is about soil testing. When you do a soil test, do you test from different parts of your lawn or just the front and the back?
You can test from as many sites as you want, and all the instructions are on that website. They want you pulling soil from different places. But if your growing environment is completely different in the front than in the back, the wise thing to do would be create two separate samples and get them tested. The testing is pretty reasonable, but the price goes up the more detail you want. But to start, you might just get, you know, a lower level test. And then once you've done what that suggests, the next time you get it tested in 3 to 5 years, maybe you'll want to go to the next step and get a little more detail.
That's a good point. And when Brad is here for his talk on February 8th, since he's talking about soils, he will talk in depth about soil testing. And just like Janet said, there are different the soil test is about like $12 to $15. And it does come with instructions. And there are like kind of two different kinds you get. Like she said, a kind of a standard one and a super detailed one. And the soil test tells you what like nutrients your soil is missing or lacking, so you know what to add to it. So if you can tune in for that, so you can get that so you can listen from him on how to read that soil test, because when you get it, it's got like all these bar graphs and different things like that, and it can be a little confusing. All right, so another question from Daniel is, are there any plantings to watch out for, especially when you're working around established trees in your yard?
Well, one thing, you don't want to disturb the tree roots. And in my front yard, which was re-landscaped in the mid-'80s, my house was built in the mid-'50s. I've lived here 45 years. I'm old. You can tell that from my picture. And so there's a big Chinese pistache. And when I was trying to repurpose some of my yard, I realized I couldn't use transplants under the tree because of all the roots that are right at the surface. And although tree roots go down deep into the ground, there's a lot of tree roots at the surface. So seeding might be a preferable way to plant. And one thing that will grow, like some trees put out chemicals that prevent plants from growing under them, and cedars are some of those. A good plant for under cedar is something called cedar sage. It can grow in those chemicals. So, and it's a shade plant, so it's perfect for under a tree. So it's not so much that the plants you put in will disturb the tree. It's the tree will disturb the plants you're putting in. But be careful you don't hurt those roots. And never put some weed and feed or weed killer around your trees. That can be very detrimental. There's a reason in all those Scott's commercials that there's big lawns and no trees.
Yeah, I didn't know that, Janet. Thank you. I mean, I don't weed and feed my yard, but I never really thought about that. And so, yeah, and you know what, you answered Daniel's question exactly. I kind of read it to you incorrectly, but he basically wanted to know about what does he need to be careful about when he's working under his established trees. So I think you nailed that one. All right, so Wendy has a really good question, and I also wanted you to repeat this. So earlier in your presentation, you talked about like how long you need to water certain like plants and shrubs and trees to help get them established. Can you please review that with us?
Yeah, basically, the bigger the plant, the longer you need to give it regular water. So trees are 3 years. And a lot of times you'll see those water gators around the trunks of new trees. And those are things you can fill with water maybe daily, but you need to keep those trees watered in. And when you're transplanting a tree, the bigger the tree, the more likely it is to fail from the shock of the transplant. So buying a smaller tree after 5 years would probably produce the same size tree as buying a bigger tree. So, and it's easier to plant. If you get a big tree, you're going to have to hire somebody to come in and plant it because there's no way you can handle the root ball. You know, they weigh too much. So it's okay, you know, it's desirable to plant something, you know, maybe with a 3-inch diameter, but trying to plant something with a 6-inch diameter, that would be very difficult to do.
I didn't think about that. I mean, a lot, and also those larger trees are very, very expensive. You can be spending several $100s on a, you know, a good sized tree.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that I was doing okay planting my little sticks in the ground. So,
Yeah.
okay. All right. And so, okay. So you said 3 years for trees. What about shrubs and flowers? How long should we water them?
Shrubs, probably 2 years. Flowers, probably a year. Some of them, there are some flowers like Blackfoot daisies and 4-nerve daisies where you would water them when you plant them, and you don't really need to water them again. They don't want water. They thrive on dry, poor soils. The Parkway Hill Strip in my yard was bad soil covered in landscape cloth 17 years ago, and then decomposed granite put on the top with the idea that nothing would grow there. Well, 4-nerve daisies that I planted to replace pansies that I normally would do in my seasonal planting, but I couldn't get down on my knees anymore, so I wanted perennials. After a few years of having those in my garden, they leaped over the sidewalk and planted themselves, and I have well over 100 4-nerve daisies growing in that terrible soil, landscape cloth, and decomposed granite. Until this summer, I never watered them. And I told all my friends, come and dig them up, and said, well, I wouldn't want to take one without asking you. I said, there's so many, it doesn't matter. You know, when they got here and saw how many there were, they realized after you dig it out, you can't even tell it was there. Most of them took it home, put it in their improved soil that is watered regularly, and the plants failed because that particular plant doesn't need water and it loves lousy soil. The same thing with Blackfoot daisies. So you've got to know your plant and what it wants, but most plants water them in, and the best time to plant is the fall because those roots can be growing over the winter and get a jump on things and be more established by the time we hit the dead of summer with the terrible conditions.
Good point. You know, I have some 4-nerve daisies that have survived all of those big freezes we've had, and they'll
Yep.
still bloom. And you're
Yes.
absolutely right that they like that neglect. And on the other daisies you mentioned, the white with the
Blackfoot.
Blackfoot, thank you. I had some in a pot. I was trying to keep them alive over the summer, and I killed them. And I think it's because I overwatered them. I gave them
Probably.
too much love.
Yeah.
So I hear
Yeah.
you on that. All right, so Janet, I want to thank you so much for your informative presentation. I also want to remind everyone that this has been recorded and it will be posted on the NTMWD YouTube page. So if you have friends that didn't make it or missed it, or you want to watch it again, or you want to share it, you can go to that YouTube page early next week and it will be there available for you as a resource. And then also, okay, the daisy that we were speaking about is a 4-nerve daisy. And it's got little blue flowers and it's got needle-like
yellow.
leaves.
It's
I'm sorry, I
4-nerve.
said blue, didn't I? I said blue.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yellow.
It is yellow flowers. I have it in my front yard. I have it in my backyard. Mine have not reseeded like yours did. I'm a little jealous because I would love to have some more of those. And that's also another source for native plants. If you see somebody like in your neighborhood who has a lot of native plants, more than likely they will share with you. You know, people who have native plants love them and want to share them, want to see more of them. I've dug up a lot of different like flame acanthus and some different things like that to give to my friends and so that's also another resource. And you might be able to save a little bit of money that way by getting some cuttings or some other plants from friends and neighbors or from some of these other garden groups. And there are a lot of garden groups around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There's like the native plants, there's the Native Plant Society and the Master Gardeners, but there's also like there's an organic gardening group and different things like that. And a lot of them have plant sales too. So Janet, you have received thousands of thank yous and applause in the chat. And so with that, we're going to be signing off. And I want to thank you and remind you to go to ntmwd.com/classes to see any other classes we have coming up. And also there will be links to replays of all the past classes we've had. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. You can tell I love talking about this stuff.
Maybe just a little bit.